Poor Francis. You look so stiff and clunky in that uniform. My sister Chloe leaned in and whispered directly into my ear at our own father's funeral. Her suffocating, expensive perfume choked out the pure scent of the white lilies around the grave. No wonder Liam chose my softness. He said hugging you was like hugging a lifeless log. I kept my spine perfectly straight, maintaining the position of attention in my army dress uniform, biting my jaw until I tasted blood. The woman spitting this venom was wearing a plunging designer black dress, pressing herself against the man who used to be my fiancé. But instead of breaking down, I smiled coldly, slowly pulled off my white tactical gloves, and typed out exactly one military command on my phone. Before I tell you what happened, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. But only if this story resonates with you. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. 4 years before that funeral, I was a naive 28-year-old lieutenant stationed at Fort Liberty. I had just survived a grueling 3-week field training exercise that left me sleeping in muddy fighting positions and eating cold rations out of brown plastic pouches. My hair was matted with dried sweat. My combat uniform had the permanent stink of diesel smoke and damp earth ground so deep into the fibers, no amount of washing would ever fully pull it out. The skin on my hands was cracked from handling rough metal equipment in freezing wind. I drove straight from the motor pool to Liam's downtown office, his favorite Thai takeout from the place, near the strip mall, warming the passenger seat, the brown paper bag already darkening with grease at the bottom. I wanted to surprise the man I was supposed to marry. I had been counting down the days in my foxhole, scratching tallies into the back cover of my green notebook like a prisoner marking time, imagining his arms around me, imagining his voice telling me he was proud of me. The lobby of his small logistics company was empty. The receptionist's desk was cleared for the night, a single desk lamp left on casting a weak yellow circle across a stack of unopened mail. My muddy boots left prints on the polished tile floor. The building smelled like recycled air conditioning and carpet cleaner, a civilian smell that always made me feel like I was trespassing in a world that did not belong to me. My hand was already reaching for the handle of his corner office door when my body froze mid-stride. My fingers stopped an inch from the brass knob. It was not a sound that triggered the freeze response. It was a scent. A thick, unmistakable, almost nauseating wave of gardenia perfume was leaking through the gap beneath the wooden door. It invaded my nostrils and coated the back of my throat. Chloe's signature fragrance, the same perfume she had drenched herself in since high school, the one she sprayed so heavily it announced her presence a full 30 seconds before she ever entered a room. I knew that scent the way a soldier knows the smell of cordite after a rifle is fired. It meant only one thing. My sister was behind that door. I pressed my back flat against the hallway wall, positioning myself in the blind spot of anyone looking through the door crack. I controlled my breathing. 4 counts, in 4 counts, hold 4 counts out. In the military panic equals death. Through the narrow gap where the door failed to meet the frame, I heard Liam's voice first. He was laughing. Not a nervous laugh, not the uncomfortable chuckle of a man caught off guard. A deep, loose, mocking laugh, the kind that comes from a man who feels completely safe in his cruelty because he believes the person he is destroying will never hear it. Don't worry about her. Frances is dry as a roof shingle. She doesn't know what passion is. She only blindly follows orders. My stomach contracted so violently, I nearly doubled over. The Thai takeout bag crinkled in my grip. Then my own sister's voice curled through the gap, smooth and slow, dripping with a condescension I had endured my entire childhood, but never at this volume, never with this much concentrated venom aimed at the center of my identity. Poor girl, always forcing herself to act like a man to prove her worth. I squared my shoulders. I locked my jaw so tight I felt the tendons strain in my neck. I kicked the door open with one decisive strike of my right boot, the same boot that had stomped through tactical obstacle courses and marched through ceremonial parades. The door slammed against the wall, hard enough to crack the plaster behind it. They were tangled together on the brown leather sofa, Liam's shirt unbuttoned to his stomach, Chloe's heels discarded on the carpet. But the sight of their bare skin was not what triggered my rage. My pupils constricted at what my sister was wearing across her shoulders. She had draped my combat jacket, the Army combat uniform blouse, bearing the Harris name tape, stitched in black thread above the right breast pocket over her bare skin. My jacket. The one I had sweated through during 12-mile ruck marches in 90-degree heat. The one I had slept in during 3-day field problems when sleep meant 45 minutes on a gravel floor. The one stained faintly on the left cuff where a piece of shrapnel from a blown tire had sliced my forearm during a convoy exercise, and the medic had wrapped the wound right there on the road while I refused evacuation. She was wearing my honor, my blood, and my sweat as a cheap piece of lingerie, using it to amplify their sick thrill. That was not infidelity. That was a desecration of the uniform. Liam scrambled off the sofa. He grabbed a leather cushion and held it across his body, his mouth working in rapid spasms, but producing no coherent sound. Just fragmented syllables and the wet clicking of a man whose saliva has dried in his throat. Chloe did not move. She pulled my jacket tighter around her shoulders, crossed one bare leg over the other, and tilted her chin upward. A slow, deliberate smirk spread across her face. She was daring me to cry. She was waiting for the breakdown she believed was inevitable because she had spent 24 years watching me suppress every emotion, and she believed that suppression meant weakness. I did not scream. I did not cry. I walked forward with measured, deliberate steps. The takeout bag was still in my left hand. I set it on the corner of his mahogany desk with a controlled motion. I shifted my weight to my right foot. I pulled the diamond engagement ring off my finger, a ring Liam had presented to me at a chain restaurant 18 months earlier, while a bored waitress watched. The stone caught the overhead fluorescent light for a single brief moment before I dropped it onto the glass coffee table between us. The clink was sharp, heavy, and final. The sound of a contract being terminated. I looked directly into Liam's panicked, watering eyes, then shifted my gaze to my sister. My voice came out flat, measured, and devoid of any tremor. You two pieces of trash deserve each other. I turned my back and walked out. The Thai food sat on his desk, still warm, the grease stains spreading through the bag. The ring sat on the glass table, catching the light of a future I would never return to claim. I moved through the empty lobby, without breaking stride, my boots leaving a final set of muddy prints on the polished tile. By the time I reached the parking lot, the diesel fumes embedded in my own uniform had overpowered the last trace of gardenia clinging to the inside of my nostrils. I climbed into my car, pulled the door shut with a slam that rocked the frame, and gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2 until my knuckles turned white and the bones in my fingers ached. I executed a flawless, tactical retreat, leaving behind the sister who shared my DNA and the traitor who wasted my time. That very night, I packed everything I owned into 2 olive drab duffel bags and shoved them into the trunk of my car. I sat at the desk in my small apartment, opened my laptop, and submitted an emergency interpost transfer request to the farthest installation on the active duty roster that matched my military occupational specialty. Joint Base, Lewis McChord, Washington State, 3,000 miles from the wreckage. The transfer was approved within 72 hours. I loaded my car at 4 a.m. before the sun was up and drove west. The 3,000-mile journey was a solitary forced march on American highways. I gripped the steering wheel until the circulation left my fingers pushing the engine past 80 to drown out the silence that filled the cabin like a toxic gas. I ate gas station granola bars and drank black coffee from truck stop dispensers that tasted like burnt plastic. I did not play the radio. I did not call anyone. I did not stop to sleep until the fuel light had been blinking red for 20 miles and the car was lurching on fumes at a rest stop somewhere in Montana. I pulled into a parking spot, killed the engine, and sat in the dark with both hands still locked on the wheel. I was not running from heartbreak. I was evacuating from a rear echelon ambush executed by my own blood. In Seattle, my new officer's salary was substantial. A lieutenant pulling hazardous duty, payfield allowances, and a combat readiness bonus could live comfortably in the Pacific Northwest. But I did not see a dime of comfort. Back home on the East Coast, my father's aggressive stomach cancer had entered its most brutal phase. The tumors had spread to his lymph nodes, and the oncologist was recommending a new experimental chemotherapy protocol that cost 4 times the standard treatment. Civilian insurance refused to cover it. My mother had died of a stroke when I was 12, leaving my father to raise 2 daughters alone on a machinist's pension. Chloe had never contributed a cent to any household expense. That left me. Every single month on the 1st, I logged into the Veterans Federal Credit Union app typed in the routing number for my father's medical account, and transferred exactly $3,000. I paid for the chemotherapy drugs that made him vomit for 6 hours straight, but kept the tumors from growing. I paid for the private nurse, a woman named Gloria, who checked his vitals at 3 a.m. and held his hand when the pain medication wore off too early. I paid for the rented hospital bed that was wheeled into the living room of the old house because my father told Gloria he wanted to die looking at the photographs on his mantle, not at the ceiling tiles of a hospital ward. I kept the receipts, every single one. Not because I expected reimbursement, but because a soldier documents everything. A manila folder in my desk drawer grew thicker every month. Wire transfer confirmations, pharmacy invoices, equipment rental forms for the hospital bed, a statement from the home nursing agency listing Gloria's hours and rates. The numbers stacked up like casualty reports, cold and factual and devastating when read in sequence. In 4 years, I would transfer over $140,000 into that medical account. I would not buy a single new piece of civilian clothing for myself during that entire period. The $3,000 left me surviving on the margins of my own life. I rented a studio apartment in a crumbling complex 3 blocks outside the base perimeter. The building had been scheduled for demolition twice and rescued twice by landlords who cared more about collecting rent checks than replacing the rotting insulation. The walls were so thin, I could hear the freezing rain slamming against the tin roof every single night, each drop hitting like a pellet from a BB gun. I slept on a surplus military cot I had bought for $11 at a base thrift store, the canvas sagging in the middle so that my spine curved into it like a hammock. I kept the electric heater turned off, even when the temperature inside the apartment dropped low enough that I could see my own breath. Every kilowatt I saved was a dollar routed to my father's chemotherapy fund. The linoleum floor was so cold in the mornings that my bare feet stuck to it with a soft tearing sound when I stood up for my 4:30 a.m. run. For 6 straight months, my primary survival ration was 25-cent instant ramen. The cheap kind sold in bulk at the discount grocery store near the base, 10 packets for $2.50. I sat on that freezing plastic floor every single night, my back against the kitchen cabinet, forcing down the salty, rubbery noodles with a plastic fork, while the blue light of my phone screen lit up the dark apartment like an interrogation lamp. Chloe and Liam were aggressively broadcasting their new life together on every social media platform. Photos from a resort vacation in Cabo San Lucas. Chloe, in a white bikini, tanned and glowing, holding a tropical cocktail with a tiny umbrella, her left hand angled perfectly to flash a massive new diamond ring directly at the camera lens. Liam in a crisp white linen shirt, his arm draped around her waist, grinning with the smug confidence of a man who believed he had upgraded. Chloe's status update screamed in bold letters across my cracked phone screen. Living a perfect life with my true love. I stared at those 6 words while the ramen cooled in the styrofoam cup on the floor beside my knee. $3,000 of my paycheck was keeping our father breathing, and my sister was spending her money on resort cocktails in Mexico with the man who had mocked me as dry and passionless. The gaslighting rotted my defenses from the inside out over those 6 months. Lying rigid on my cot at night, staring at the dark water stains spreading across the ceiling, I fought the intrusive thoughts that crawled into my skull the moment I closed my eyes. The sound of Liam's mocking laughter playing on a loop. The image of Chloe pulling my combat jacket tighter around her bare shoulders, smirking, daring me to break. The echo of every family gathering where my mother's sisters had whispered just loud enough for me to hear that I was too rigid, too cold, too unfeminine to hold a man's attention. That I needed to soften up, wear dresses, stop walking like I was marching to formation. I commanded platoons of soldiers. I managed supply chains worth millions of federal dollars. I had earned commendations signed by colonels. And yet I was being gutted slowly, methodically, by the psychological knives thrown by people who shared my last name. I was bleeding out in a freezing apartment, funding my father's survival, down to his last morphine drip, and absolutely no one on the planet knew. Not my commanding officer, not the chaplain, not the soldiers under my command who saw me every morning at formation with my uniform pressed and my boots polished and my face betraying nothing. I locked the phone screen, pressed it face down on the cold floor next to the empty ramen cup, and chose to endure the pain in absolute silence. One afternoon in the early fall, Seattle's rain came down so hard it sounded like gravel being poured from the sky onto the concrete. I was power walking across the base parking lot toward my car, head down, soaked through my uniform blouse, the fabric clinging cold and heavy to my shoulders. I was running on 4 hours of broken sleep and a protein bar I had eaten at my desk 6 hours earlier. A hand suddenly appeared in my path, palm out, blocking my forward movement like a traffic cop stopping a truck. Martha, a civilian finance worker in her mid-50s who processed travel vouchers and budget reconciliations on the third floor of the headquarters building. She was a thick-boned woman with graying hair cut short and practical reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, rain running down her no-nonsense face without her bothering to wipe it. She did not offer pity. She did not tilt her head and ask if I was okay with that soft voice people use when they already know the answer. She looked me over with the sharp clinical assessment of a woman who had survived her own wars and recognized the damage in someone else's posture. Major Harris, you look like you're carrying the sky on your shoulders. Come grab a beer with me. It was the first time in over a year that a single human being had looked past my rank insignia and seen the fractures underneath the armor. We sat in a dimly lit, run-down pub 2 blocks outside the base gate. The wooden booth table was sticky with old beer rings. A muted college football game played on a small television bolted to the wall above a broken jukebox that had not worked since the Clinton administration. I wrapped both hands around the cold glass of cheap draft beer and stared at the condensation running down the side, watching the droplets merge and slide toward the sticky surface. My psychological defenses, the walls I had constructed and reinforced every single day for over a year, hardened with discipline and sealed with silence, finally collapsed under the weight of Martha's patient, unyielding presence. I did not sob. Soldiers do not sob. But the tears ran silently down my cheeks and dropped onto the scarred tabletop, darkening the wood in small circles, while I confessed everything. The affair, the gardenia perfume, the jacket with my name tape, the ring clinking on the glass table, the 3,000-mile evacuation, the ramen, the $3,000 on the first of every month, the photos from Cabo, the voice in my head that whispered every night that maybe I truly was too stiff, too dry, too military to be worthy of love. Martha listened without interrupting, without nodding, without making a single sympathetic sound. When I finished, she reached into the back pocket of her khaki slacks and slid a plain white business card across the sticky wood. Dr. Evelyn Vance Army, Behavioral Health. Building 4020. You are a combat soldier, but combat soldiers need medics to heal too. Don't let those bastards define you. The following Tuesday, I sat in Dr. Vance's clinical office on the second floor of the base behavioral health building. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with a faint, persistent whine. A small American flag stood on her metal desk beside a framed photograph of her own unit from a deployment I did not recognize, a group of soldiers in desert camouflage squinting into Middle Eastern sunlight. I sat rigid in the gray cushioned chair, my back not touching the backrest, my hands flat on my knees, my boots planted shoulder-width apart on the thin carpet. I admitted the thing I had never said aloud to any living person. I was deeply insecure about my lack of softness. I believed with absolute conviction that my military discipline, the posture, the composure, the emotional containment I had sacrificed my entire youth to build was the exact deficiency that had made me disposable. Doctor. Vance leaned forward in her chair, closing the distance between us until her face was level with mine. Her voice cut through the fluorescent hum like a surgical instrument slicing through infected tissue. Who dictates that femininity means being frail, loyalty, the courage to protect the weak, resilience? You aren't dry, Francis. You are forged in steel. That single sentence rewired my entire operating system. The victim mentality that had been eating me alive for 14 months was purged from my hard drive in one clean sweep. I walked out of that office, standing 2 inches taller. I reactivated combat discipline. I rebuilt my routine from the ground up with the ruthless efficiency of a commander restructuring a failing unit. 4:30. Every morning I was running 5 miles in the dark, through the wet streets surrounding the base, my breath visible in the cold air, my boots hitting the pavement with a rhythm that drowned out every whisper Liam and Chloe had ever planted in my head. I crushed every physical fitness test by margins that made my commanding officer raise an eyebrow. I tore apart the regional supply chain I had inherited from my predecessor, found 14% in waste and redundancy that no one had bothered to look for, and rebuilt it into a system so efficient that the commanding general personally called my office to ask who was responsible. I earned my promotion to major and the title of Director of Strategic Logistics in a ceremony at the battalion headquarters, the gold oak leaf pinned to my collar by a full colonel who shook my hand and called me one of the sharpest logistics officers he had seen in 20 years of service. That same afternoon, I drove off the base and walked into a civilian mall for the first time in over a year. I bypassed the display of weak pastel pinks and soft corals that Chloe had always obsessed over. Colors she paired with floral sundresses and delicate sandals designed to project fragility. I walked straight to the cosmetics counter, ignored the saleswoman's attempt to guide me toward the everyday natural collection, and bought a single tube of burgundy lipstick. A sharp, dark, almost violent red, exactly the color of dried blood on a field bandage. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in that mall, twisted the cap off, and drew it across my lips in one clean, deliberate stroke. The woman looking back at me was not broken, not dry, not stiff. I was a commander who had been through fire and come out the other side with my spine intact. That lipstick was not makeup. It was war paint. And I was never lowering my head again. My new position as Director of Strategic Logistics required frequent high-level coordination meetings at the Pentagon. Briefings with defense contractors, congressional liaison officers, and senior military leaders who controlled budgets larger than the economies of small countries. It was during one of these sessions, in a windowless conference room, 3 floors below the Pentagon's central courtyard, that I first encountered Alexander Sterling. He was the CEO of Vanguard Defense, the largest private military contracting firm operating on the East Coast and the apex predator of federal defense procurement. Unlike Liam, who had constantly flaunted leased sports cars and overpriced watches to project an image of wealth he had borrowed into existence, Alexander operated entirely on quiet power. No visible logos on his tailored charcoal suits, no monogrammed cufflinks, no flashy pocket squares, or designer shoes designed to be noticed. He sat at the back of the briefing room during a high-stakes logistics cost review, arms folded across his chest, a legal pad on the table in front of him with nothing written on it, watching without speaking while 3 other defense contractors stumbled through bloated proposals engineered to bleed the government dry through inflated overhead charges. When it was my turn to present, I dismantled the flawed cost structure of the leading competing bid using nothing but a whiteboard, a dry erase marker, and raw procurement data I had memorized from the classified file the night before. Alexander did not look at my legs. He did not glance at my chest. He locked his eyes onto mine when I began speaking and did not break contact for the entire 20-minute presentation. After the meeting, while the other contractors packed their briefcases and shuffled toward the exit, he approached my podium. He extended his hand. His grip was firm, his posture straight, without being rigid, his eyes steady. "Major Harris, your analysis is as sharp as a tactical blade. You just saved the government millions of dollars." He respected my intellect, not my compliance. Our first meeting over black coffee at the Pentagon cafeteria turned into a dinner at a quiet restaurant in Arlington, where the tables were spaced far enough apart that no one could eavesdrop on a conversation about federal contracts. Then another dinner, then a weekend drive through the Virginia countryside in his vehicle. Our dates were never at flashy VIP nightclubs or rooftop lounges where photographers and social climbers circled like vultures. He drove an armored black Volvo SUV with reinforced glass panels and run-flat tires. When I asked him why a man who could afford anything on 4 wheels chose something so understated, he looked at me without smiling and said he cared about getting us home intact, not showing off at a red light. He became my rear guard, the person covering my 6 while I continued to advance. He treated my military discipline not as a flaw to be corrected or a rough edge to be sanded down, but as my single greatest strategic asset. He never once asked me to soften my posture, lower my voice, or trade my uniform for a cocktail dress. The first time I showed up to dinner with my burgundy lipstick and my hair pulled back in a regulation bun, he told me I looked like a woman who could run a country and that it was the most attractive thing he had ever seen. It was the exact opposite of everything Liam had ever said about me. The exact opposite of everything Chloe had whispered at family gatherings while I sat in the corner pretending not to hear. One evening, months into our relationship, I sat across from him in his home study in a townhouse in Georgetown. Both of us were drinking black coffee at 9 p.m. because neither of us slept like normal civilians. Alexander was reviewing a thick file stamped with federal audit markings, flipping pages with the practiced speed of a man who had read 10,000 contracts in his career. He mentioned almost casually, the way someone might mention the weather, that Vanguard Defense had just won a decisive corporate victory. They had crushed an East Coast logistics company that had been bidding aggressively for a massive Department of Defense supply chain contract. The competing company had submitted fraudulent financial capability statements to inflate their rating during the evaluation process. Alexander's legal team had uncovered the deception during routine due diligence, compiled the evidence into a formal audit package, and handed it directly to federal investigators at the DoD Inspector General's office. The company had been permanently blacklisted from all government contracting. The company's name was Evans Logistics, Liam's company. The CEO faked his financial capability, Alexander said calmly, turning a page in the file without looking up. He's drowning in debt, but borrowing heavily just to polish his public image. I handed the audit over to the feds. The DoD permanently blacklisted him. My heart hammered against my ribs, hard enough that I felt my blouse fabric pulse. I kept my face absolutely still. I lifted my coffee mug, took a long sip, and set it back down without a tremor, without lifting a single finger, without speaking a single word of revenge, without ever mentioning Liam's name to Alexander. My partner had legally and systematically decimated the professional existence of the man who had mocked my uniform and stolen my sister. On Christmas Eve, inside Alexander's quiet cabin in the Cascade Mountains east of Seattle, snow piling on the windowsills, a fire crackling in the stone hearth, filling the room with the smell of burning cedar. Alexander set down his coffee cup. He walked around the kitchen island to where I was standing, took both of my hands in his, and dropped to one knee on the wide plank hardwood floor. He held out a custom ring box covered in dark navy leather. Inside, nestled against black velvet, sat a massive, flawless, uncut, natural cashmere sapphire set in a thick platinum band. The stone was not a delicate, glittering ornament designed to catch ballroom light and make women gasp. It was heavy, dense, and impossibly rare. It was a fortress compressed into a gemstone and placed on my finger. I love the woman and the soldier in you. Let me protect your back for the rest of your life. I accepted. My hand did not tremble. My voice did not crack. I had built my own fortress from ramen noodles, freezing floors, and military discipline, and now I had the ultimate ally standing watch on the wall beside me. We snapped back to the present, to the funeral. Right after my father's casket was lowered into the freshly dug earth, the entire extended family migrated back to the old house on Maple Street. The house I had paid to keep from foreclosure with $3,000 of my military salary every single month. The house where my father had taken his last breath in a rented hospital bed while Gloria held his hand, and Chloe was nowhere to be found. Chloe did not host a solemn wake. She transformed the living room into a networking cocktail party designed to dazzle Liam's fake business associates and impress the extended relatives who measured a person's worth by the brand of car parked in their driveway. A catering company set up silver trays of expensive finger food on tables draped in white linen. Champagne flutes clinked against each other while my father's body was still warm beneath 6 feet of dirt. Chloe cornered me near the kitchen doorway, her eyes scanning my crisp army dress uniform from the polished black shoes to the service ribbons pinned above my left breast pocket, her expression radiating undisguised contempt. She ordered me to fetch a bag of ice from the garage, loudly announcing to the nearest cluster of guests that my costume was making people uncomfortable, and maybe I should change into something more appropriate for a social event. The rage spiked through my chest like a bayonet being driven between my ribs, but my face remained an impassive mask of ice. I did not fetch the ice. I moved to the far corner of the living room, placed my back flat against the wall, and observed the battlefield. Liam positioned himself at the center of the room, surrounded by my father's older relatives, Uncle Ray, prominent among them, with a tumbler of whiskey. He kept refilling from a bottle he had brought himself. Liam lifted a silver spoon and tapped it against the rim of his crystal wine glass until the chatter died down and every face in the room turned toward him. He cleared his throat. He adjusted the Windsor knot of his expensive silk tie. He straightened his jacket lapels. Then he delivered his performance with the polished confidence of a man who had rehearsed it in front of a mirror. To my late father-in-law, Chloe and I have no regrets. These past years, we paid all the medical bills, hired the best doctors and private nurses for him. We did everything out of filial piety. He raised his glass. The room erupted in approving murmurs. Uncle Ray wiped a theatrical tear from his eye and nodded solemnly. Cousins I had not seen in a decade clapped softly. Liam's business partners lifted their glasses in unison. And then one by one, the eyes in the room drifted toward me. The lonely soldier standing alone in the corner, without a drink, without a partner, without a single person standing beside her. Their expressions carried the same message. Pity for the spinster who chose mud over marriage. The oxygen vanished from my lungs. He paid. A violent fury swept through my skull and settled behind my eyes with the crushing pressure of a migraine forming at the base of my brain. The internal ledger I had maintained for 4 years fired open inside my head. Every single transaction projected across my vision like a targeting display overlaid on the scene in front of me. I was the one who sat on a freezing linoleum floor, eating ramen that cost 25 cents a packet. I was the one who drained my military salary to nothing on the first of every month, staring at the banking app confirmation screen while my empty stomach growled. I was the one who signed the paperwork for a federal credit loan to cover the gap when my father's treatment costs spiked during his final months. I funded every single vial of morphine that eased his pain when the cancer ate through his stomach lining. I paid for Gloria the nurse who held his hand at 3 a.m. when the agony became so severe he could not form words. I was the one who called the pharmacist from a supply closet on base during my lunch break, reading credit card numbers over the phone, while soldiers walked past the door, never knowing their commander was one paycheck away from defaulting on a federal loan. Chloe and Liam had not spent a single cent on his care. Their entire contribution to my father's survival consisted of 3 staged fruit baskets delivered by a grocery service, photographed from 2 angles, for social media, captioned with crying face emojis, and never mentioned again. Now this parasite was standing in my father's house, wearing a silk tie, purchased with money borrowed at predatory interest rates, openly stealing my sweat, my debt, my sacrifice, and my tears to construct his brand as the devoted, generous son-in-law. Uncle Ray and the rest of the ignorant extended family applauded like spectators at a magic show, wiping away tears for a performance that was entirely fabricated. They looked at me with pity. The lonely soldier. The dried-out spinster who chose service over softness and got exactly what she deserved. My hands curled into fists behind my back, the nails cutting crescents into my palms. My pulse dropped from the elevated fury of a person about to lose control into a steady, lethal, rhythmic beat. The beat a sniper's heart makes in the half-second before the trigger pull. I locked my eyes onto Liam across the crowded living room. I was not going to correct the record. I was going to annihilate his entire existence. If your blood is boiling, watching this parasite steal a soldier's sacrifice, hit the like button and tell me in the comments if you have ever had a family member take credit for your hard work. Keep watching because the trap is set and the execution order is about to drop. Chloe linked her arm through Liam's, and they slithered across the living room toward the corner where I stood with my back against the wall. She looked me up and down her eyes, traveling from my polished shoes to the medals on my chest with the slow, deliberate contempt of someone inspecting a piece of furniture they had already decided to throw in the dumpster. Her lips curled into the same smirk she had worn 4 years ago on that leather sofa. Francis, Liam, and I think you should discharge. Military life isn't for women. Liam will set you up with a secretary job at his company. Good pay, you just brew coffee and file papers. It's better than rolling in the mud and dying an old maid. The living room did not go quiet gradually. It went silent all at once, as if someone had ripped the power cord out of the wall. Then the laughter erupted. Mocking, rolling, full-throated laughter, bouncing from wall to wall. Cousins elbowing each other in the ribs, Liam's fake business partners smirking behind their champagne flutes. Even the catering staff exchanged glances. Uncle Ray shuffled forward from the semicircle of relatives, swirling the cheap whiskey in a crystal tumbler that had belonged to my father. He looked at me with the patronizing, glaze-eyed expression of a man who had never in his entire life been told no by a woman and saw no reason to start expecting it now. Take the offer, niece. Working an office job might help you find a husband to take care of you. They were not just insulting me. They were smearing the uniform I had bled for. They were spitting on the rank I had earned through years of physical and mental endurance. They were dismissing the career that had single-handedly funded the survival of the man whose funeral they were turning into a cocktail party. They honestly believed that a major managing a multi-million-dollar federal logistics budget was desperate for the charity of a bankrupt fraud running a company that could not pass a federal audit. Liam straightened his shoulders, riding the wave of the crowd's approval, like a surfer who did not see the reef beneath the water. He tilted his chin and aimed his smirk directly at my face. Don't be arrogant with false pride. My heart rate dropped to resting tactical levels. 60 beats per minute, 58. Combat mode activated. I reached behind my belt and pulled out the white dress gloves I had removed earlier at the graveside. I held them in my left hand, the crisp white fabric bright against the dark wood paneling. I stepped forward. 1 step, 2, 3. I closed the distance between myself and Liam until I was inside his personal space, close enough to smell the bourbon on his breath and the sour desperation underneath it. My voice dropped into the low, measured command tone I used when issuing tactical orders that could not be questioned, could not be negotiated, could not be appealed. I can't accept, because my husband wouldn't be happy if I quit to pour tea for a company about to declare Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The silence that followed was not ordinary silence. It was the pressurized silence of a room full of people who have just heard a detonation cord ignite but have not yet felt the blast wave reach their bodies. Chloe's face contorted. The smirk collapsed. Her lips pulled back from her teeth. She hissed the word like it was venom she was trying to spit from her mouth before it poisoned her. Husband. Her voice climbed half an octave, cracking at the top. Did you hire an actor to save face, you psycho? I did not respond verbally. Words were unnecessary. I pulled my phone from the inside pocket of my dress uniform jacket, unlocked it with my thumbprint, and opened the encrypted text message thread labeled Vanguard 1. I typed 5 words with my right thumb, each letter deliberate and precise. Time on target. Execute. I pressed send. The blue delivered confirmation appeared on the screen. I slid the phone back into my pocket and folded both hands behind my back at the position of parade rest. 5 seconds of absolute silence passed. The room held its collective breath. Every pair of eyes in the room shifted from my face to the front door and back again, trying to calculate what was about to walk through it. Then the heavy brass doorbell echoed through the house, deep and resonant like a church bell, tolling the end of a long and terrible sermon. The heavy artillery had arrived. Outside the front window, a massive black armored Cadillac Escalade rolled to a halt at the curb. The engine idled with the deep, low rumble of a V8 built for hauling armored weight, not for showing off at stoplights. The chrome grille caught the gray afternoon light. 2 men in identical black suits stepped out of the front doors, moved in coordinated silence to the rear passenger side, and opened matching black umbrellas against the light drizzle that had been falling since the burial. They positioned themselves on either side of the rear door. The door swung open. Alexander Sterling stepped onto the wet sidewalk, buttoned the single middle button of his bespoke charcoal suit jacket, and walked toward the front porch with the measured stride of a man who had never once been required to hurry for anyone. The front door of the living room swung open, and Alexander filled the frame. He was 6'3". His shoulders occupied the full width of the doorway. The sheer oppressive weight of his physical presence sucked the oxygen from the room, the way a sudden drop in barometric pressure precedes a violent storm. He wore no visible logos, no pocket square, no tie pin, but the Patek Philippe on his left wrist caught the overhead chandelier light, and anyone in that room who understood real money, not rented money, not borrowed money, not leased money, knew that single timepiece on his wrist was worth more than every vehicle parked on the street outside combined. He walked straight past the gaping relatives, past Uncle Ray, whose whiskey hand had frozen mid-sip, his mouth hanging open, past the catering staff, who pressed themselves flat against the wall as if royalty were passing. He stopped directly in front of me, placed one large hand gently on the side of my face, kissed my forehead once, and murmured an apology that his private jet had been delayed by weather on the tarmac. The phrase private jet hit the room like a fragmentation grenade detonating at waist height. The crystal wine glass slipped from Chloe's fingers and shattered against the hardwood floor, sending shards skidding in every direction. Liam's face drained of every ounce of blood so rapidly that his tan appeared to evaporate in real time. His composure, his arrogant posture, the smirk that had been surgically attached to his face all evening. All of it collapsed simultaneously, as if someone had cut the strings holding up a marionette. He recognized Alexander immediately. Every logistics CEO on the East Coast who had ever bid for a federal contract knew the name Sterling. Vanguard Defense was the corporation that had annihilated Evans Logistics, handed the fraud evidence to federal investigators, and permanently buried Liam's company in a blacklist grave. Liam's mouth opened and closed twice before sound came out his jaw, working like a fish pulled from water. Mr. Sterling? His voice cracked on the second syllable. His knees were visibly shaking beneath his pressed suit trousers. Alexander looked at him. The expression on Alexander's face was not anger. It was not contempt. It was the flat clinical disinterest of a man examining something unpleasant, stuck to the sole of his shoe, before scraping it off on the curb. His voice came out smooth, cold, and hard as polished glass. Oh, Evans, shouldn't you be on your knees begging the IRS for that $2 million debt audited this morning? My legal team reported you just mortgaged this very house to get a high-interest loan to pay for a rented Mercedes. The relatives gasped. Uncle Ray's whiskey sloshed over the rim of his tumbler and ran down his wrist. Chloe let out a strangled, choking sound from somewhere deep in her throat, her manicured nails digging into the sleeve of Liam's jacket so hard the fabric bunched as the illusion of her perfect, wealthy, glamorous life disintegrated in real time. Publicly, spectacularly, in front of every single person she had spent 4 years trying to impress. Alexander wrapped his arm firmly around my waist and turned to face the paralyzed crowd. His voice projected across the room with the calm, absolute authority of a man who had addressed Pentagon boardrooms, congressional oversight committees, and federal courtrooms without ever once needing to raise his volume by a single decibel. I am the CEO of the corporation that ousted Evans. And most importantly, I am the husband of Major Francis Harris. I want to thank you, Chloe. Because you greedily picked up this trash 4 years ago, I found the greatest treasure of my life. The lethal shot had landed. The fake empire, the rented luxury cars, the mortgaged house, the stolen medical bill, credit the social media fantasy built on borrowed money and other people's sacrifices, all of it was reduced to ash in front of the very audience it had been constructed to deceive. The moment Alexander finished speaking, Liam's phone began buzzing frantically inside his trouser pocket, the vibration loud enough to be heard in the silent room. His hands were shaking so severely that he fumbled the device as he tried to pull it free. It slipped from his wet fingers, bounced off his thigh, and hit the hardwood floor face up with a sharp crack. The impact triggered the speakerphone function. A cold, robotic corporate voice echoed through the silent living room, every syllable landing like a nail being hammered into a coffin lid. Asset seizure notice due to overdue payments. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. The room emptied. Not slowly, not politely, not with murmured excuses and handshakes at the door. The vulture relatives who had been toasting Liam's generosity 5 minutes earlier snatched their coats from the hooks, grabbed their car keys from the bowl on the entry table, and backed toward the front door in a disorganized retreat, their eyes darting between Alexander's suited security detail, standing on the porch, and the nearest exit. They fled the house like rats abandoning a hull breach, desperate to clear the blast radius before someone could corner them and ask for a loan. Chloe snapped. Whatever thin, corroded wire had been holding her composure together broke clean through. She let out a shriek that bounced off the walls of the living room, lurched forward, ripped the massive diamond ring off her left ring finger, and shoved it directly into Liam's face, her hand shaking violently. Sell this ring. It's worth $50,000. Alexander glanced down at the stone, pinched between her trembling fingers. He let out a single short, dismissive exhalation through his nose. Not quite a laugh. Closer to the sound a man makes when he finds a counterfeit bill in his wallet, and is more amused than annoyed. That is artificial moissanite, $200 on Amazon. My wife's ring is solid, cashmere sapphire, its value could buy 10 houses like this. Chloe's entire body went rigid. Her pupils dilated until the blue of her irises nearly disappeared. The ring, the symbol of everything she had stolen from me, the glittering proof that she had made the superior choice, was a $200 laboratory-grown fake purchased on a retail website by a man who could not afford the real thing. Her mind shattered visibly behind her eyes. 4 years of social media posts, flashing diamond photos. 4 years of holding that ring at arm's length to catch the light at every dinner party and family gathering. 4 years of believing she had traded up from a soldier to a king. And the crown was made of plastic. She wound her arm back and threw the worthless stone directly at Liam's face, the fake diamond bouncing off the bridge of his nose, and began screaming curses at him with a vocabulary I had never once heard her use in polite company. The final collapse came fast. Liam dropped to his knees on the living room rug. The man who had mocked my uniform, who had called me dry as a roof shingle, who had laughed while my sister wore my combat jacket as a piece of lingerie, now crawled across the floor on his hands and knees like a dog that had been kicked. He reached me and grabbed the hem of my dress slacks with both fists, his fingers white against the dark fabric, his face swollen and red, streaked with sweat, and the beginnings of tears he was too broken to hold back any longer. Francis, for the sake of our sisterhood, for our parents, please ask Mr. Sterling to give me a subcontract, or I'll be out on the streets. He was using my dead father, the man whose medical bills I paid with ramen and freezing nights, as a human shield to protect his own cowardice. I looked down at him. My face held no anger, no satisfaction, no pity. Only the cold, flat, absolute density of forged steel. I pulled my leg back with one clean motion, breaking his grip on my trousers. Don't open your mouth to mention my parents. You stole the credit for my medical bills, you insulted my rank, and now you demand I save you? Military rules are simple. You clean up the crap you create. Resistance is futile. I turned my back on him. I took Alexander's arm. We walked through the front door of my father's house, past the security detail down the porch steps, and into the cold evening air. I did not look back. Not once. The cool drizzle hit my face, and I filled my lungs for the first time in hours. Behind me, the house was silent. The Empire was dust. On the private flight back to Seattle, the cabin was dark and quiet. The hum of the jet engines at cruising altitude was the only sound, steady and low, the mechanical heartbeat of a machine carrying me away from the wreckage. Alexander sat across the aisle. His eyes closed his breathing, even giving me the space he always knew I needed without being told. I sat with my seatbelt, fastened my posture straight, running my thumb slowly across the worn leather cover of the only item I had taken from my father's house, his journal. A small battered leather-bound notebook he had kept in the top drawer of his bedside table for years. I had found it earlier that day while the caterers were setting up champagne flutes in the living room, tucked beneath a stack of old Veterans Affairs pamphlets and a faded photograph of my mother in her wedding dress. I opened the journal to his final entry. The handwriting was shaky, the letters uneven and slanting downward to the right, written by a hand weakened by months of chemotherapy and morphine drips. Some of the ink had been smudged by water drops. I realized were his own tears, dried into faint circles on the paper. But the words were clear. I know Frances carried everything alone. She is the most resilient soldier. Chloe chose fake glamour, but Frances chose honor. I am proud of my officer. A single tear broke free from the corner of my right eye and fell onto the page, darkening the ink around the word proud. I pressed my thumb over the wet spot gently, as if I could hold that word in place on the paper forever. I flipped back through earlier pages. There were entries about his pain, his medication schedule notes about Gloria's visits, but woven between the medical entries were fragments about me. He had written about the wire transfers. He knew exactly where the money came from. He had calculated the amount himself. He wrote that he never told me he knew because he did not want to burden me with the guilt of knowing he felt helpless while his daughter paid for his survival with her hunger. My father always knew. He saw every sacrifice. He understood the ramen, the cold apartment, the wire transfers on the first of every month. He saw the silence I maintained so that he could spend his final energy fighting the disease instead of worrying about his daughter fighting the family. The final knot in my chest, the one that had been cinched tight for 4 years, pulling tighter every time Chloe whispered an insult, or Liam stole a credit, untied itself slowly, and fell away like a bandage removed from a wound that had finally healed beneath it. 2 weeks later, I was standing at the kitchen counter of our house in the hills above Puget Sound, slicing a green apple with a ceramic paring knife, while the morning fog pressed thick and gray against the bay windows. My phone vibrated violently against the granite countertop, the sound sharp and intrusive against the quiet of the kitchen. A text message from an unsaved number illuminated the screen. I recognized the area code. Chloe. You have to send me 10 grand. Liam took the car and ran. The bank is throwing me on the street. You are my sister. You are filthy rich family. Has to help each other. I set the knife down on the cutting board. I picked up the phone and read the message once, letting each word register. I let out a single dry exhale through my nose. The woman who had whispered that I was stiff and clunky at my own father's open grave. The woman who had worn my combat jacket as a piece of lingerie while sleeping with my fiancé. The woman who stood by while her husband stole the credit for 4 years of medical bills I had paid with my own blood, sweat, and hunger. She was now demanding $10,000 under the sacred banner of sisterhood. I did not reply. I did not feel anger. I did not feel satisfaction. I did not feel the desire for revenge because revenge had already been executed with surgical precision in that living room. I felt an overwhelming, clean, surgical sense of apathy toward an enemy combatant who had fired her last round, thrown her last grenade, and was now standing in the open with an empty weapon and no cover. This was the same woman who had once posted a photo of herself laughing on a beach while I ate ramen on a freezing floor to pay for our father's chemotherapy. The same woman who had worn my combat jacket as bedroom decoration. The same woman who had whispered at a graveside that I was stiff and clunky while the dirt was still fresh on our father's coffin. And now she wanted money. She wanted the safety net she had spent a lifetime tearing down for everyone else. Military discipline mandates one simple, non-negotiable principle. You never resupply a hostile force. I tapped the screen once with my index finger. I pressed the red text that read, block number. I watched the contact vanish from my phone. The name, the number, the history, all of it erased in a fraction of a second. I severed the bloodline permanently with a single tap of my finger. The war was officially over. I set the phone face down on the granite counter, picked up the paring knife, and finished slicing the apple. That evening, I stepped out onto the back porch. The Seattle mist hung low over the garden, cool and clean against my skin, carrying the faint scent of wet cedar and salt from the distant sound. Alexander was kneeling in the damp, dark mud of the flower bed along the back fence, his suit jacket tossed over the porch railing, his white shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, his expensive watch left inside on the kitchen counter. He was planting white tulip bulbs in neat, deliberate rows, pressing each one into the cold, wet earth with his bare hands patting the soil down firmly before moving to the next hole. He looked up at me and smiled. Not the performative grin of a man trying to impress an audience. The quiet, private smile of a partner who understood exactly what the woman standing on the porch had survived and chose to build something new beside her. White tulips symbolize forgiveness. I was not forgiving Chloe. I was not forgiving Liam. I was not forgiving Uncle Ray or the vulture relatives who had applauded a liar and pitied a soldier. I was forgiving myself. Forgiving myself for every night I spent on that freezing linoleum floor, believing I was not enough. Forgiving myself for every second I wasted, doubting whether my discipline was a defect instead of a weapon. Forgiving myself for the years I allowed other people's cruelty to define my worth. I caught my reflection in the glass porch door as I stepped down into the garden. My uniform was flawless. My burgundy lipstick was sharp. My posture was straight, and the cashmere sapphire on my left hand caught the last gray light of the Pacific Northwest evening. I am a soldier, and a soldier never breaks even when the enemy shares her last name. If you believe that walking away and cutting off toxic family is the ultimate victory, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below if you have ever had to block a relative to protect your own peace. And remember, your worth is never defined by those who betray you.